Rick McKelvey, Friends of the Oxbows. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here to you today about one of my favorite topics. The Friends of the Oxbows, you might ask yourself who we are. We're a small group, initially 3 people that lived on one of the Oxbows, the Brandon Avenue Oxbow, becoming quite concerned about the evolution of that Oxbow, i.e. it was filling in. So you could say that what brought us together as a group was our concern about siltation and the fact that these oxbows in the Penticton area are what we'd have to call urban wetlands today. We felt something had to be done actively in order to maintain these as wetlands, or they were going to disappear probably within a relatively short length of time. We pride ourselves on being a persuasive group. We are just a citizens activist group. We have no authority to do what we attempt to do, so we are depending on partners to get things done. We like to think of ourselves as wetland stewards, and that's pretty much the intention of our talk here today. This is the Brandon Avenue Oxbow before we got finished with it last year. Quite heavily silted in, and as you can see here, almost no water visible. After persuading the city that they needed to be responsible or take responsibility for the heavy siltation in this oxbow, just to back up a little bit, there's a 1-meter storm drain that comes into this oxbow that has, over the course of the last 10 years, basically filled it in to the point where, as you can see, this is the before picture, you could pretty much walk across the oxbow. After we persuaded the city to dredge it out, it now looks more like an open wetland. The thing that we're most proud of, we can't, I guess, technically take any credit for the city actually having done this, but we like to think if we hadn't been talking to the city and anybody else who would listen, the oxbow may have looked like it did before and eventually filled in. Now it looks more like a wetland. An overview here of what Penticton looked like probably in the late 40s. I presume it to be the 40s on account of the airstrip is already here, which I think was built during the war. But you can see the wet nature of the landscape here. I've labeled a few of the spots that you might well know now. The road currently runs up this side of the lake. There wasn't even a road there at the time. The Red Wings development, it was all wetland and marsh. Ellis Creek comes in here, and this oxbow here is now bounded by the channel. We call it the Warren Avenue Oxbow, just for your reference there. Some pictures, compliments of the Penticton archives showing some of the wetlands here. This is foreshore of Okanagan Lake over towards the east side. So this would be approximately where the Red Wings development is now. This is the old river channel here. This is what the river looked like at one time, heavily built up on both sides, or not built up, but grown up with trees. Built up is a different term, isn't it, entirely? And the river mouth, so it was obviously a very wet, much wetter area. This is what it looks like today. The channel runs down through the center of where all these wetlands were. Most of the remaining river channel oxbows are somewhat visible here. These little bits of water on each side of the channel is all remains of what was once a very wet area, and we've developed over most of the floodplain. So we've lost a lot of wetland habitat here. Not that that's good or bad, that's just the way it is. And it behooves us now, in our view, the Friends of the Oxbows, to do something to preserve what little we have left. So the problem is Penticton has allowed construction of houses to happen right up to the edge of these oxbows on their side. By and large, the lands on the Penticton Indian Band remained undeveloped, but that's not to say that they will for any considerable length of time, and in fact should not be looked at as the lands that will save the oxbows. The oxbows are, in our view, isolated and somewhat neglected. What do we call this one? Falcon Court Oxbow. We've named the oxbows based on the streets here, and I think this is Falcon Court, the Channel Parkway here. This side of the oxbow is land that's within the Penticton Indian Band lands. At the moment, these are what are called cutoff lands and technically are under the purview of the provincial government. But on the city side, you can see we've developed right to the edge of them. There's relatively little we can do for habitat there now other than to persuade the landowners that live there that maybe there's a better way than just grass, as you've seen in some of the other presentations here today. A quick view of how the lots have been subdivided in Penticton. Sometimes the lot boundaries obviously are some distance from the shoreline. Other times it's pretty evident that people have trespassed onto the shoreline, and there may be opportunities here for stewardship, or since there's almost no enforcement of these types of issues, that's pretty much the only way we feel we can go with this, to recreate some of these habitats and to manage them on the long haul. The wetlands have been mistreated, I guess, is the easiest way to say what's happened here. Obviously, these people that own this property here think they've done the right thing. They like to see the water. They're depending on the wild vegetation on the Indian land side to remain there in order to have a nice little bit of a viewscape. Some people have allowed a little bit more rough land to be retained there, but nonetheless, the city side has suffered severely from having been so heavily developed. This is the largest oxbow. It's the one we call the Yorkton Avenue Skaha Place oxbow. It's the most southerly oxbow. This is band land on this side, relatively intact riparian. A very minor amount of riparian left on the city side and heavily developed with a trailer park. You saw this picture earlier on. This groin construction here was actually placed by the landowner in order to reduce the erosion of the foreshore of their property. What should happen here, in our view, is this should be taken out, and you can see back here a bit of rip-rap rock that has been placed. This needs to be replaced with that type of a sloped bank. So it's easy enough to say what should be done. Who's going to pay for this? Somebody put a lot of money into putting the Lego blocks in there in order to slope this and place that type of rock, which is what we're advocating. We've got to find additional partners for this. It's not going to be the city that does it. Farther down that oxbow, another example, the reason that this looks so barren is this is not a natural system anymore. Of course, when the river flowed down here, there would have been a recharge of sediments on an annual basis. Now all we have is erosion, and the only thing that's preventing continued erosion is the few trees that remain here. So for an example, what we would advocate here again is resloping this bank, putting rock riprap in it, soil on top of that, and allowing riparian vegetation to regenerate into a sloped and armored bank. I'm giving you examples of what we think could happen on private lands here. That's the point of my talk, if I didn't make that clear. Another picture of the same large oxbow. These willow trees are quite attractive, but as far as we know, they don't provide a great deal of wildlife habitat. They do provide some bank stability, but they also take a lot of water out of the soil. So the question is, what can we collectively do to try to maintain a functional wetland within a city environment? What does riparian look like in the city environment? It's not likely to be as extensive as it was once. If you can recall those pictures I showed you, there was no riverbank, really. It was a gradation between the water and the upland, all covered with vegetation. But as you've heard, there's many opportunities for plantings. I suggest we also need to consider removing plants we don't want there. If you plant large trees, you have to think of some kind of a protection for them, because there are critters out there that like to eat trees. Fencing is not a bad idea either. It makes a hard boundary between the riparian area and the landowner's property, which many people like to build fences around their property. They seem to find that as comforting, so I wouldn't discourage that. Another thing to consider, though, in the urban environment is people's pets. If we've created habitats for small birds by these various types of plantings, we've also set the stage for their people's pets to have a significant impact on local wildlife. This is a picture I took from Oxbows in the south of the Oliver area, just to give you some sense of what a functioning riparian area might look like. This was a river channel. It now does not have any flow on it. It's an isolated oxbow, but you can see the dense nature of the cover on the sides here. This is the ideal situation. Not necessarily very practical anymore in the city, but some degree of dense vegetation is desirable and is probably achievable, just not on that scale. A few examples here of oxbows in the city. Again, this landowner here has denuded the foreshore. Others have been a little bit more gentle with it. Here we see a large buildup of cattail, which also, although it's a plant community that has become somewhat rare in the Okanagan, is a management issue. That's primarily what we had removed when we took the silt out of the Brandon Avenue oxbow, because once you get above 50% coverage on your wetland with cattails, the productivity to other organisms begins to diminish. So all that to say that because these oxbows or wetlands in the city of Penticton are not functioning in the natural sense anymore, we have to, as humans, continue to think about the amount of energy we need to periodically put into them to have them do what we want to do. So just quickly, there are obviously opportunities here for revegetation of some type. Leaving it, here's a fence here, for example, and then just on the other side of the fence, pretty much nature takes its course. A similar example here, sometimes riparian areas look rather messy because trees fall, they go in the water. This is a natural process. This is part of the detrital food cycle. This is where the water and the organisms in the water get their nutrients from in the long haul. This, however, looks a little bit stagnant because it's got a lot of floating pondweed growing in it and algae. And in fact, most of our oxbows only have groundwater intrusion. They do have outlets to the river channel, but they're rarely used. They would only be used if there was some reason for the oxbow to have filled up with water. So they generally, as the river channel water level rises, the oxbow water levels rise in concert with it, mostly from groundwater intrusion. It would be nice to have them reconnected. Engineeringly, that's a possibility, but politically and socially, it would be a tough, an uphill struggle to get that done. This, I'm not sure, I can't tell you where I took this now. It is one of our oxbows, and that's, you know, it looks messy, but that's a functioning riparian ecosystem. Now, if your house is back here, you're not going to see much of this water, so is that really something you're going to be interested in protecting? Our job, we think, as citizen activists, is to convince people that this is the sort of riparian you should be looking for on the end of your property. There may be ways for you to cut paths through it so you can see into it, but you know, there's always the danger of loving these things to death. If you have too much access to them, the riparian doesn't function and the wetland doesn't get the animal use that it might have in the past. As I mentioned, some critters are management challenges for us. There are beavers endemic in our wetlands in the city, and if you don't wrap a tree, this is what happens. And in fact, many of the large cottonwoods that were, up until a few years back, evident in our wetlands in the Oxbow areas have been damaged by beaver. There's many signs of beaver predation, if you will, on large trees on our wetlands. After the Brandon Avenue oxbow was cleaned out, this is the track that the backhoes used to get to the sediment before they removed it. I don't know if you can make this out very well, but these are little wire cages. We replanted these with rose bushes that the city bought for us from, do you remember where that was, Bob? They came from one of those nurseries that sells wild plants in any event. So we built these little cages and just put these into the ground. As far as we know, they've survived the winter. We'll find out in the spring. But these are the sorts of things that a landowner can do themselves. This is relatively inexpensive, $2 or $3 per plant, I think. These little wire cages, in fact, you can have our cages when we're finished with them, just to prevent deer from grazing on them over the wintertime. Another bit of a shot there to show you, so you can see what a caged rose bush looks like. Also, we had the backhoes, as they left, replace some of the coarse woody debris that was there too. The intention being to have this look like this area here within the next 2 or 3 years. A bird's eye view of a protected rose bush. So once again, this is the Brandon Avenue Oxbow. The egress into the wetland with the backhoe was here, one of them, so it doesn't look that bad now. And it certainly, we're intending to see it regrow here. We would like to be able to convince the neighbors along this side that there are things that they could replant to recreate some riparian function on their side. It isn't likely that we're going to see this sort of heavy tree growth, in my view, ever again on the city side unless we start buying properties. This is the north end of what we call the Warren Avenue Oxbow, where we feel there's a good opportunity for the city. I'm actually standing on city property here. For the city to create a sort of a, what would you call it, a passive park where you have access to viewing the Oxbow, but you don't encourage people to go right to the Oxbow. That, again, as I said earlier, you can love these things to death. If you have unlimited access to the Oxbows, you won't have any bird life in them. This would be a good place for a hide. You can build, one could build, it's always a matter of who's going to build it and who's going to maintain it. But a covered walkway and a blind here, you would be surprised what organisms you can see there without disturbing them. In summary, that, you know, our point of view here as Friends of the Oxbows is we have to take an active role in managing the Oxbows. As I said, there's no natural processes really occurring there now. These are urban wetlands and they're being used as stormwater receiving environments. It means there's stuff coming into them that's a little bit different from when they were the functional river channel. We have to plan ahead. Periodically, we have to put energy into these things to keep them doing what they do, what we want them to do, which in my view is to provide for wildlife. The issue of viewscapes, because many people appear to have cleared their land right to the water so they can see the ducks in the water, it's a difficult one to deal with. Obviously, if you don't have people able to see the ducks, they're probably not going to care about the long-term future of the wetland. So there's got to be a balance. Maybe you can have types of trees planted or bushes that aren't that high. You can still see across them and into the water, that sort of a thing. This goes to low-profile planting. Personally, I don't think it's likely we're going to see the regrowth of very large trees. And we also know that the cottonwoods, even that exist there now, are hazardous to houses if they should fall towards the city side, even the ones that are across the way. As I mentioned, ongoing maintenance is something that has to be considered. Even with low-profile plantings, depending on what species you put in, they will need to be pruned or trimmed at some point. Pest management, I would consider pests to be things like beaver. Some people might shudder when they hear me say that sort of a thing, but again, if you don't protect the plants you put in from animals like beaver, they aren't going to be there. Similarly, cats and dogs, if they're left to their own devices, will become pests in an urban environment. Finally, the thing that you can do to most help the cause is join the Friends of the Penticton Oxbows.